Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be with you again. There's no kidding. This is the friendliest congregation in the state of Florida, I do believe. And I always enjoy being with you. But I have to say today, when the reading from the Hebrew Scriptures starts out, shout out, do not hold back, I take that part literally. So I'm going to rant a little this morning. But I'm going to start with the calendar. In the Christian tradition, historically, the calendar has covered the whole part of our journey in faith every year. Each season has a purpose to it. In Advent, we turn inward and we say, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves for the coming of Christ? In Epiphany, which it is right now, the task is the showing forth of God's glory, the showing forth of God's person. My husband, as some of you know, is Greek, and it's good to have a Greek translator in the house. The word epiphany comes from epiphanion, which I probably mispronounced, but he's not here, so what the hey. And that word has two parts to it. Epi means from above, and phanion means this is who I am. So literal it means the word from above saying this is who I am. And so this is a season where we celebrate God saying to us, this is who I am. Yo, look over here. And so the other important thing about the calendar is that this is a time called ordinary time. Right? There are two seasons, Epiphany and Pentecost, which are life as usual, nothing special, no preparation, just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, ... And Epiphany is one of those times, and so I want to use that calendar today to say this is about how we live as Christians in ordinary time. Right? Not anything special, no special spiritual tasks, except the big spiritual task, and that is, how do we live as Christians in the world in ordinary time? And so in come the prophets. Now, a priest saying she has a favorite part of the Bible is a little like a mom saying she has a favorite child. You're not really supposed to do that. So we'll just pretend this isn't on tape, and I'll say, but I do have a favorite part of the Bible, and it's the prophets. And now I want to do a little left turn into what the prophets were. A lot of us think if you say prophecy in the modern world, it means what's going to happen next Thursday. But that's not what it meant to the Hebrew. It's not what it means in the Hebrew Scriptures or to the people of its time. The prophets actually had a public office under the king, right? There was an office of the prophet. And it was a very important office because the prophet's job was to keep the state and the king in line. It was to proclaim what you had to do to be righteous. And that was a counterbalance to the king. Because we all know, having read the Bible and lived in the world, kings sometimes have motives that are, shall we say, a bit suspect. So the prophets were there, and there were some freelancers like the famously cranky Amos. But most of the prophets we read come from this court office of the prophets. And certainly the school of Isaiah was one of them. And just as a historical note, Isaiah was not one person, he was in the beginning, but there was a whole school of prophecy, like a Greek school of philosophy that followed him. So there's a whole bunch of oracles that are labeled as Isaiah that come from a variety of people working in his tradition, and this is one of them. And so what does he say? Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion. To the house of Jacob, which means the muckety-mucks in power, their sins. Okay, so there are your marching orders. Call out the problems. Call the king. Call the officials to righteousness. Call the people to righteousness. Yet day after day they seek me, and delight to know my ways. You know, these guys are on the right side, right? The king goes, what does God really want me to do? This is a theocracy. This is a good question for him. As if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. Well, that looks good on paper, but I'm calling you know what on that. They ask of me righteous judgments. They desire and delight to draw near to God. And they do. And if you talk to any public official who identifies himself or herself as a Christian, 99% of the time they will say, I delight in the right. I want to draw close to God. This is what I should do. But they crab about it. Another human trait that we all share. Why, O God, do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you don't notice? And they get an answer from the prophet, from the mouth of God. Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day. You oppress your workers. You fast only to quarrel and fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today won't make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose to for you to humble yourself? Is it to bow down like a plant that's caught in the wind, to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Okay, here's the translation. You put on a good face. You do this a lot. You proclaim your own righteousness. But it's religiosity, not real religion. And I'm looking for something different. How do you fast? And fasting is an important concept, particularly in the Hebrew scriptures, because food is not always available. To give it up is a symbol of death, right? So if you're fasting, you're entering into your own death at that point. And it's a time and a place where you're supposed to be particularly close to God, to listen to what God has to say to you. So what is the fast that I choose? Loose the bonds of injustice. Undo the thongs of the yoke. Unburden people. Let the oppressed go free. Break every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry. Bring the homeless into your house. And when you see the naked, cover them. And don't hide from your mother-in-law, okay? Don't hide from your own kin, even though you know your brother is about to ask you for another $20. Not that I have any personal experience with that. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. Okay, so do these things, then God will reveal the divine self to you. God will say, this is me. Hello, I'm here. This is epiphany. Now, we use epiphany in a common language to mean an insight. You know, the aha moment, the I should have had a V8 moment. And that's not at odds with the Hebrew scriptures here. Because when God comes, we're supposed to go, oh yeah, that was it. But the hard part is for us to get here. And the tool given the Hebrew people was the law. It was the law. And we have it in the gospel today where Jesus says, I am not here to take away the law. I'm here to see that the law is fulfilled. Which means you need to live in the law. You need to do what the law says. Why? Because that defines a ground on which you can speak with me. If you do what the law says, then you're going to find me. So I want to tell you a little story. I had a spiritual director early in my life when I was a young and innocent seminarian and completely full of myself. And he was renowned for being a tough egg, and he was. He was very loving, but he was a tough egg. And so one day we were having this flighty theological discussion, or I was at least, and he went, all right, enough. he says, I want you to do something for me next week when you see me. And I said, okay. And he says, I want you to fix lunch for me. And just bring a box lunch for me, okay? And I'm like, okay. I said, what do you want to eat? He goes, whatever you like best. So I admired this man very much. I was crazy about him, and I respected him deeply, and I really liked him. And I was a young and impressionable seminarian, and I wanted to impress him too. So I went out and I bought one of those bento boxes, you know, those Japanese lacquer boxes that are really beautiful. And I cooked my heart out, and I made all kinds of good things. And I put one piece in each compartment of that bento box, and I thought I was going to put plastic forks and spoons in there, and I thought, well, that's kind of tacky. And so I put real forks and spoons in there, and I put a cloth napkin in it because, hey, I was going the whole 9 yards, and I wrapped it up, and I actually tied a bow around it. And so I went in, and I very ceremoniously presented Stephen with the box lunch, and he goes, oh, thank you, that's very sweet of you. And I thought, you asked me to do this, what's going on? And he goes, and he hands it back to me. And he says, now, take downstairs outside, and I was living in New York City at the time. He says, give it to the first homeless person you see. That's it for today. And I'm like, really? So I went outside, and he had an office in the Village in New York, which is a place where there are plenty of homeless people, unfortunately. And I saw a guy sitting beside a building, and he had one of those blue cups with the Greek coffee cups with the Greek key and the Parthenon on it. And he was sitting there, and he was collecting coins. And I walked up to him, and I said, I have something for you. And he holds up the cup. And I said, no, I have lunch for you. And I held out the box. And he looked at me and kind of went, and looked away. He said, go away. And I'm like, okay, so I have just a little bit of the stubbornness in me, just a tish. And I'm like, no, I'm not going on to the next person. And I stood there in my blue suit and my high heels and my office wear, and I said, I have lunch for you. Please take it. And he's like, So I knelt down on the sidewalk next to him. Do you know what kneeling on a New York sidewalk does to your beautiful blue suit and your pantyhose? It is not pretty. It is not pretty. And I said, really? I have lunch for you. Please at least look at it. He looks very suspicious. Now, you know, I can understand that. If somebody came up to me and said, here's a lunch in New York, I'd be giving him the hairy eyeball too, because, you know, we're all suspicious. And he looked at me, and I said, please, you'd do me a great honor if you would take this lunch. Besides, my knee is killing me. And so I handed him the thing, and he took it, and he refused to open it. He put it on his lap, and he goes, go away! I went, God bless you. And I thought, I'm glad to get out of here, okay? We're not kidding. So I get up, and I start walking down the street, and I look back, and he had untied the bow and was opening the box and looking at what was in it, and I have every reason to think that he was going to eat it. And I walked on to the subway and back to my office, and I'm thinking, what the hell was that about? And so I realized, after banging my theologically educated head against a wall for a couple of days, what my spiritual director was trying to get me to see. And he was trying to put me in the position of God, and to see that God had made something that he loved with good intentions to give to a world that didn't really want to have it, and was suspicious of it, and was looking for a way around it. And I went, oh. And the light turned on. It was an epiphany for me. And so I was thinking a lot about that this week as I was watching the proceedings in Washington. Now, I got to tell you, reasonable people may disagree about what went on in Washington. I will spell out to you my bias, and that is that I think Donald Trump is a felon and the worst thing that ever hit the shores of the United States since, I don't know, athlete's foot. So take my words with a grain of salt. Reasonable people can disagree about them. But I think the thing that hurt me the most in all of that was that there was this appearance, and perhaps fact, probably fact, of injustice. And it was injustice by people who had been very happy to proclaim their righteousness. I get on Twitter tweet after tweet after tweet, for example, from Marco Rubio with Bible verses in them. And so I know that he considers himself a good Christian. I would suspect that Rick Scott feels the same way, and I would suspect that most of the people in Congress who are Christians feel the same way about that. Alan Dershowitz said as much. And so for me, to know that the prophets are calling us to do justice, not somewhere out in the ether, but today, last Wednesday, next Thursday, next month and the month after that, in the real world. We don't get easy decisions in the real world. Nobody gets them. Trust me, I keep praying for them. Most of it is complicated, messy, painful when we have to make moral decisions. That is the nature of the beast. Because the law, which is a gift to us from God, a gift that defines holy ground where we might meet God, is often counterintuitive. Love your neighbor. Well, that looks great on paper. We can sing it 42 times in church. But man, I want to tell you, when my former next door neighbor, came and screamed at me because my dog was looking at her through the hedge between our yards, I was not having loving thoughts. In fact, they were reasonably unprintable. They were unreasonably unprintable. For me to love in that situation requires a lot. It's hard. And that's a little no-brainer. And so when public people come up against their public duty and make a show of piety, but are unwilling to engage in the real issue of justice, and my issue is not where they came out, it's how they engaged with the question, and whether they were willing honestly to confront the question, is pretty scary. And it's especially offensive when it comes from people who are claiming to be righteous and good Christians and willing to enforce those rules on all of the rest of us. So I'm not going to use from the pulpit the word that the president used, but you know what I'm calling on that. But more to the point, it is a betrayal of the nature of the epiphany of Christ. It is the betrayal of the nature of justice. And you know what? In the Hebrew scriptures, how do you know where God is? You look for where justice is. Justice is considered theophany, the actual presence of God. That's why the prophets go on about it so much. That is God, is when justice is done. And it's no different now. It's no less complex now, and it's no less essential now. It takes guts to live the Christian life. A lot of happy, slappy Christians, of which I'm not one, go, oh, you just take Jesus into your heart and everything's going to be fine, rolling from here on out. Oh, I wish that were true. It's hard being a Christian. That's our dirty little secret. It is much easier for me to hurl curses at my wacko neighbor than it is to stop and go, why does somebody have such a stake in making her own life and everybody else's life miserable? Being a Christian is hard. Being a Christian was hard this week for the people sitting in the Senate. It was hard for the people sitting in the House. It was hard for all of us who were watching it and trying righteously to wrestle with what's the right thing here. And the number of people who were willing to stand up for what the right thing is, whether or not I agree with them, can be counted on one hand. Maybe two if we press it to the House hearings. The Gospel today quotes Jesus. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? You're no longer good for anything, but thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Let your light shine before others. Be the epiphany. Be the inspiration that lets people go, oh, that's what God looks like. Be the justice that allows someone to say, this is where God is. This is the presence of God, even when it's hard, even when you rip your pantyhose. Amen.